Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to Restoring the Circle, Our Children, Our Blessing. I'm Honovi Schoonover, Operations Specialist at Redwind Consulting, and we're going to be starting off today with a prayer by Bonita Ball, the Elder Abuse Project Coordinator at Redwind.
Thank you, Honovi, and good morning. I would like to give everyone a warm welcome and thank you for joining us here at Restoring the Circle, Our Children, Our Blessing. I would like to ask that we share a moment of silence for the children and youth who we have lost to violence, as we know all life is precious. Now, if you will please join me in prayer. Creator, we thank you for the blessing of being here today. We ask that you help us to remember the legacy and resiliency of our ancestors. Remind us that through their lives, we must continue to strive for improvement in the lives of our children and youth. We ask that you give us the cement in our knees to stand strong and to help us to remember our kindness and our humor as we nurture resiliency within communities. We also ask you to help us keep our work sacred with your intentions in the forefront. Pinamia Ginihan. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful prayer, Bonita, and thank you all for joining us. We'll be getting started with the official welcome and introductions in just a few minutes. All right, well, it looks like we are all here, so I'm going to get started. So I'm going to be sharing with all of you a poem. So this is kind of a short poem, but I think it'll help get the point across of the entire conference or virtual training. So here's just some information about the original creator of the poem. And once again, all this is recorded, so if you don't quite catch all of this, you will be able to see it later. But I'll now get into the poem. So this is called Remember. Remember the sky that you were born under. Know each of the stars' story. Remember the moon, know who she is. Remember the sun's birth at dawn, that it is the strongest point of time. Remember sundown and the giving away tonight. Remember your birth, how your mother struggled to give you form and breath. You are evidence of her life and her mother's and hers. Remember your father, he is your life also. Remember the earth whose skin you are, red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth. We are earth. Remember the plants, trees, animal life, who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Talk to them, listen to them. They are alive poems. Remember the wind, remember her voice. She knows the origin of this universe. Remember, you are all people and all people are you. Remember, you are this universe and this universe is you. Remember that all is in motion, is growing, is you. Remember, language comes from this. Remember, the dance language is, that life is. Remember. Thank you all.
We just want to give everybody a minute to kind of come through the door. And thank you so much, Honovi, for getting us started with that amazing prayer session and introduction, both for yourself and Redwind. We appreciate you and the work that you do behind the scenes. Also, our support staff, Brittany, Honovi, and David, and Monica, I believe, are also all doing support staff behind the scenes. So if anybody has any questions for them or needs any help, you have other staff that's trying to get onto the call, please reach out to us so we can be of assistance in any way. My name is Amber Warman. I'm the Children and Youth Project Coordinator. I've been working with, and I hope you guys can hear me. Am I good on sound? Because I can put headphones on if it's more clear. Just wanna, looks like we're good, looks like we're good. Okay, I'll just go ahead anyways, just to be on the, I feel like the microphone being closer helps. But I just want to take this opportunity to welcome you guys and just kind of remember why we're all here today, which is to end violence against children and youth who have experienced violence in their home. And when we talk about children and youth and violence, we're not just talking about child abuse and neglect. We're talking about domestic violence. We're talking about sexual assault. We're talking about missing children. We are talking about the many forms that violence takes in our homes, our communities, and with online predators. Violence doesn't just affect our children at home, it affects them not just at home, but online, in their communities, in their schools. And we're going to be covering those different types of violence throughout the next few days. And so we're just excited to get started, kind of talking about how we can make changes to really impact our community and our children. We often know that when we're talking about the work that we do, right? People are like, what do you do for work? And it's like, I'm trying to end violence against children. And that's a heavy subject. People are like, whoa, all right. But what does that really mean? It means helping people develop training for their communities, helping them create policy and procedures that better support our communities, not just our tribal communities, but all communities. I feel like a lot of times in mainstream media today, as Indigenous people, our views are viewed as something that it's an old tradition, that's the old way of doing things, that's out of style. But I find more and more that I read about children and youth, the more things that we're trying to do, it's actually, we're going backwards. We're going back to traditional roots. We're remembering to hug our children, to love them, to care for them, to teach them in a good way. Children are hands-on learners. They see what they learn. And so in our homes and in our schools and online, we have to be proactive in making sure that what they see and learn is done in a good way, that we're bringing back our traditional values, and we are leaving the historical and generational traumas, not leaving them behind, but learning from them, to learn from them and say, this is the way that things were done for so long and it wasn't in a good way. And we want to return to doing things in a good way, in a way that supports our young and small relatives, and that we can support them and they can truly find themselves, because it's not just about us doing the work, it's about teaching them the work so someday they can do the work. I am honored today that June 7th is my son's 18th birthday, and I couldn't do this presentation without talking about him just for a second and saying how honored and grateful I am to be his mother for 18 years. And all of us have children and youth in our life, whether you're a mother to children, or you're an auntie or a grandma or a sister or a cousin, or you have a niece or a nephew or a little friend in your life. Those children are precious and they just bring so much joy. And at the same time, we still want to think of, as much as I love my older son, today on his 18th birthday. Unfortunately, his little brother, not my son, his dad's son, is sick with COVID, and he's only 1 year old, and he just turned 1 last week. So I'm also keeping him in my thoughts and prayers today, as all of you hopefully can keep him in your thoughts and prayers, because he's too young to be vaccinated, and he is struggling. So I just want to put those wishes and prayers out there for him, as well as all those wishes and prayers for all of you and your children, because COVID isn't over. And our children and youth have been struggling with this, still going to school wearing mask mandates, still going to school, trying to understand why they had to be locked down for a year, couldn't play with their friends. All they're trying to comprehend what happened and then why now it's okay. I know I live in between the reservation life and the city life, the urban life. And when I'm in the urban city where I live, there's hardly any masks and the mandates have been lifted. And when I go back home to the reservation where my boys are and they go to school, there are still mask mandates. And so them trying to understand, what we view as parents as what is right and what is acceptable is important, and putting those values on them, as they are the caretakers for the next 7 generations. It's every piece of knowledge that I am grateful to have learned from so many of you. And I don't know all of you. I know some of you, some of our staff, some of you I've met along the way presenting. And I just want to thank you, like Vicky. She's not here today. She's out doing the work in the community. But we do want to mention our founder, Victoria Yabanas, and all the amazing work that she's done, and the women before me, the ancestors that she learned from, her grandmas and grandma, aunties and uncles, passing down knowledge to her, passing it on to me, passing it on to my coworkers, that I have the ability to pass it on to my son on his 18th birthday, who's always talking to me about, geez, mom, you're always giving me another speech. And I'm just like, baby, this is information. This is information that was a gift to me. It's not something that I learned, that I feel that I own in any type of way. It's a privilege. It's my honor to have been gifted this knowledge to help myself continue to heal, because that's what it has been, is a healing journey. And many of you in the work today, when you're asking yourself, why am I doing this work? It is part of your healing journey. And I hope that you recognize that through the work that you're doing, you are healing yourself, you are healing your children, you are healing your community. And that's what we are doing when we are restoring the circle, our children, our blessing. And I just wanted to take this time to thank you all for being here, for participating in this conference. We have some chats going on. I'll let one of Redwind's staff maybe can read some of those chat comments. And I just want to take this opportunity again to welcome you and thank you. And if you miss any of the sessions or anything that's going on, they will be recorded, they will be downloaded to our website, so you can always view this information later, or don't feel like you have to pick between the multiple sessions that are going on, because they're both going to be really amazing information, and the panel is going to have some great information, but they will be recorded. They'll be available to you to view, to go back to reach out to our presenters if you have questions later. We encourage questions. We want to hear from you guys. And with that, I'll also open it up if anyone wants to take the time to share about yourself, your organization. We'd be honored to hear from you. Again, I'm Amber Warman. I'm with Redwind Consulting. I live in North Dakota. I'm from the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation in South Dakota. I know I didn't really get into all that to begin with, but just want to share, and I encourage you guys to share.
Well, I'll start. I'm Hope Wenke. I'm a member of the Omaha Tribe of Nebraska. Abeblite uiblaham wake ijaje uitate Hope Omaha wa uble. And that's just saying, let me introduce myself. My name is Hope, and I'm a member of the Omaha Tribe of Nebraska. And I'm part of the Bird Clan. I currently am the project coordinator for the Responses for Urban program. I work directly with Native and non-Native programs in the urban areas to help get them educated and learn more culturally appropriate ways to address and help victims in the urban settings. I recently worked as the director of HASIA, which is Redwind's advocacy program, and then just now came over to Redwind. I'll pass it on.
Thank you so much, Hope. That was great.
And I'll go next. My name is Raquel de Herrera, and I am also with Red Wind. I am a Taos Pueblo Mexican descendant. I've been with Red Wind, I feel like 7 years. It's been a while. Right now, I am the Tribal College Campus Technical Assistance Provider. So I help tribal college campuses with their sexual assault response. When I first started at Red Wind, I was a special projects coordinator. And then I moved into an advocate for our HACIA advocate program, program director, and then moved into TA as well. So kind of Hope and I kind of have the same kind of experience in our journey through this work. Previously, before I started at Red Wind, I worked with children as an early childhood education teacher for a little over 10 years. So children are one of my biggest passions. One thing that just moves me in the work that I do is really wanting to help create a better world for our children. And so I'm very passionate about this. And with that, I will pass it on to Rebecca.
Good day to you all. I'm really grateful to be here in this space with such passionate advocates and people doing this work. And I really appreciate the comment about a passion being working with youth. A little bit about me. So I have a little teeny tiny little consulting thing called Hybrid Love Stories. I'm a survivor and an advocate. I'm Oglala Lakota Mohawk, and I'm Gypsy. My daddy's a full-blooded Gypsy. I'm a mother and a daughter. I'm a child abuse survivor and an advocate, like all these intersections, right? I ran away like 12 times in my life, so I understand some of the intersections that youth are going through, but yet still a student because this is a new world of internet stuff. And that wasn't around when I was young. I'm 47 now. I do have a day job, my full time doing sex trafficking in Indian country in Alaska with MILSAC. I worked at NIWRC doing the Native Love Youth Project. So yeah, this is a passion project of mine because I feel that both advocates and survivor advocates, we work really strongly together to navigate this new world where 2 years ago it was Backpage, and then now it's OnlyFans, and now OnlyFans is out, and now it's new things, and it's like chasing the social media monster that just makes communities and our streets and our res roads not the only place where danger happens anymore. Now it's just all the time. And with COVID, now it's all the time, every day, all day long on Instagram and all of the apps. So I'm really excited for this panel and the conversation and to learn from you. And hopefully I have something to share that might be useful too. So Wopila, thank you.
Thank you both, all three, but Raquel and Rebecca there. Also, Hope, those were great introductions. And just for anyone trickling in a little bit late, my name is Amber Warman. I'm the Children and Youth Project Coordinator for Red Wind Consulting. I am an enrolled member of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe in Eagle Butte, South Dakota. I'm also multiple other things, French, German. My kids are MHA, Cheyenne River, Standing Rock. I mean, we have a pretty mixed, diverse household. And like Rebecca and many of our staff, I'm a victim of child abuse and sexual assault. I survived, and now I get to do the work that at one time I was dreaming. I didn't understand why my life was this way. And all I can say is that I hope that my journey was never for nothing, and that the information that we get to share with you guys, so many of you that have done the work for so long, that can share with us back, that we share with you, that we all just come together and have a really great lesson of learning and sharing today on how we can better support our children and youth as they face the challenges that we have both faced ourselves and the new challenges that they're facing today. And we're just excited that you guys are here today, and we will go ahead and get started with this panel. Honovi, if you want to change to the next slide, please. So our first question for our panelists is, growing up, how did domestic violence impact your communities on or off the reservation? And if we just want to maybe go in the same order in which you guys started, that would be maybe helpful. That way you guys kind of know where you're at. And you can choose to pass on any of these questions, ladies, if you feel like you just don't have the answer right now, or you want to think about it a little more. I know for myself, growing up on our reservation communities, there were all different types of households. And domestic violence, sexual assault doesn't just impact our reservation communities. This is something that's been ongoing for generations, and not just in Indian country, all over the world. So how did it impact you in your life? If you just want to take some time and share with us, and Hope, we'll start with you.
Thank you. I lived off reservation when I was young, and my mother experienced violence, and I don't remember a lot of it, but it still has impacted me. And I think when I worked at social services on the tribe, and seeing both sides, even on reservation and off reservation, there's just the lack of resources and how normalized it is, and how it's not talked about. Even off the res, my mom didn't talk about it. She never once had a conversation with me. And then when I was at social services, I tried to engage with a lot of those children, like, it's okay to talk about it, but it's just common. And it's something that it's really disturbing that it's so normalized is my comment.
Thank you for sharing with us. It is very normalized, and it's unfortunate that violence is seen as normal in our communities. And we'll talk more in other questions about how we can impact change. But thank you for sharing, Hope. Raquel, did you have an answer for us?
Yeah, yes. And I feel like this is a very big thing when we think about impact, because I mean, if we really dissect and we really talk about those interconnections with a lot of things, there's that impact, goes beyond just even interpersonal relationships, but it impacts our communities, our well-being of communities. It impacts just even, how we operate as a community. And again, it's so normalized that, I think one of my personal experiences, I grew up in an urban setting. My grandmother married someone in the military, and I grew up in an urban area. And once I got into this work and actually started having conversations with my grandmother, really just some of her experiences in New Mexico, and how not only was there that impact of domestic violence, that, gender-based violence that we know women experience at higher numbers, but then there's that racial component that almost impacts it, accessing resources. It's harder to access resources as a Native person who is experiencing violence. So, when we think about that impact, it's, so normalized, but it's also just having those access to resources. And then even because it's so normalized, a lot of people don't realize that they are in a relationship that is a violent relationship. It's just become that normalized thing. And I think I never really saw my mom abused. But I think the impact of my grandmother and my great grandmother and that abuse has trickled down into just a lot of our family trauma. and a lot of things that we experience as a family. You kind of, when you take a step back and you kind of have a lens of domestic violence and a lens of colonization and that impact, you kind of start seeing and put pieces together of how that has impacted everything, down to the way we parent, down to the way we, it impacts every facet of our lives. And it's just this question is just, there's so many things, but I think really to emphasize what Hope said, that it's become normalized, but also I would say even the intersection of violence against Native women and how the root of violence, colonization is that root of violence, and how that intersects and really exacerbates that experience much more than I don't want to say more, but just there's that component, that dynamic that I think is really important to talk about. And another thing I think, often when we talk about violence against Native women, are just in Native communities, it's often, we kind of talk about, well, what is going on? But I think it's really important to talk about how colonization has really kind of contributed and really is the cause of that, and to really think about the roots of violence, I think is a big one too. So, and I'll pass it on to Rebecca.
That was great, Raquel. And I just want to say that I think one of the things that we, when you're talking about like that normalization, and even though it impacts us in different ways, the abuse is still abuse, right? Because I feel like some of us are growing up in such traumatized times that we think what we're seeing is just normal, or it's less than even the abuse that we've already gone through. Because I know for myself, as a child that was abused, I didn't recognize domestic violence later in life because it was less than the childhood abuse that I had gone through. So I know that in our Native communities, or just in our communities in general, that's part of the impact, is that sometimes the abuse and neglect that our kids are going through is pretty harsh. And whether that's not necessarily from a parent. I mean, myself, I have seen grandparents come in and talk about their adult child that's 40, 50 years old, who is abused by, say, a neighbor person, and they lived with that shame all of these years and put that on themselves. And that pain is deep rooted in domestic violence and sexual assault of our children and in our communities. And it's hard to talk about. And so it's great that we're having these conversations and we're impacting policy and procedures that develop change in our communities. So thank you again for those comments, Raquel.
Yeah,
And
Amber, I just wanted to bring something up because it just
Yes.
came up as you were talking. But I also think,
absolutely.
when we talk about the racial components and oppression, I even think about, when we talk about children and youth, and especially when there's violence in the family, and I think about the impact of even, the forced removal of children from Native homes and from families. And I also think there's that component where, and not saying that this is exactly why no one talks about it, but I think there's also that fear of, if we talk about it, then it really emphasizes that the racial oppression of children, Native children, should be removed from their homes and from their communities. And I think, there's just that impact of that racial impact, that systemic oppression, and how that plays into it. And then also exactly what you said. When I first went through a domestic violence training, I was surprised to see what was considered violence, what is violence, and I think there's that, we see it through social media, we see it through media, where there's one way that we portray violence, and it's a lot of other things that are violent. I even say, I've heard before where people will say, well, the children aren't in the same room when this happens. And so, but that's violence, it is, just violence, and really that's that impact. So I think that's really important. Thank you, Amber, for pointing that out, because I do think it gets minimized a lot of the time, even by ourselves, violence. So thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, that generational and historical trauma that many of us have felt. And even though, and we'll get into this later, because I don't want anyone to like be like, that's not all there is, because we know that, right? We also have our indigenous strength. We have our resiliency. And when we talk about resiliency, I think of like my grandmother and the lessons that she taught me in life that maybe weren't what we're teaching today, but they were at least that along the lines of like, love yourself, love your brothers and sisters and your aunties and uncles, your family, take care of them, those type of lessons. And those helped me be resilient in my life. So we don't always want to talk about the generational and historical trauma and that fear, right? But there is that fear because we have that fear of, my grandmother was taken out of her home at 5 years old. 5 years old, she was taken from her mother's arms. My great grandmother, who I got to meet, this isn't someone that is some distant person that I never knew, some ancestor I don't know. This is my great grandmother. She was alive until I was 5 years old, and I knew her, I met her, and I loved her. And I can only imagine her losing her children one right after the other, and she had 13 children. My grandma being her second oldest child and her first daughter, being taken from her mother's arms, and my grandmother having to grow up without a mother to love her, to console her, to when she's got tears streaming down because she has a skin knee, there's no mom there. There's no one telling, there's someone telling her like, buck up, get up, you're okay. And if there's sexual abuse going on in those, and we know that there was not just sexual abuse, but abuse as well going on in these. And I don't want to call them boarding schools anymore, because the new language for that is they were assimilation camps, and these children were being assimilated into European culture that was not their own culture. And it wasn't until 1978 that we were even able to practice our religious freedoms and our ceremonies, our powwow, our sun dances, our sweats. And so when I think of 1978, my grandma was born in 1930. Like, she had lived an entire lifetime before she was able to have resiliency, to really fully connect with who she was. And by the time I came into her life, she was able to bring that forward. But as a mother, she was unable to bring that forward for her children. And then in that disconnect, you see the drugs and the alcohol and the neglect of children, because they were using the drugs and the alcohol to cope with never have been feeling that love and that connection to both their parents and their community and their people. And so when we talk about restoring the circle, that's what we're talking about. We're giving ourselves the leniency, the love, the considerateness to ourselves and to our children to make mistakes, to not know how to dance, to not know all of our ways, to not know how to necessarily speak our language, but the gift to be able to learn it, because that's something our ancestors didn't have. They didn't even have the right to learn it. They didn't have the right to raise their children. So, I mean, when we talk about, again, restoring the children, that's our restoring the circle. This is the discussion. This is what we're talking about. And thank you, Raquel. You just brought up so much thoughts, I guess. And Rebecca, do you have anything to add to this question? We'd love to hear from you.
Well, Pila, I'm so grateful. Wow, so many things are like bubbling right now. So I'm grateful. So where my butt sits at my little desk with my little lights and video camera, I am 15 minutes from the Carlisle Indian School. And we the local community tends to the grave sites of the children that did not survive that atrocity. I do like the new language that the Carlisle Industrial School is assimilation camp, because that's so true. So that's a part of our local reality. And my great grandmother, my granny, was alive too. And there is so much, she grew up 10 miles from Carlisle. And that's how I came to the Oglala, was through the Carlisle School. So that's woven very tightly in my heart. So I just wanted to mention, I'm grateful for that being woven in, because I'm 3 generations down from Carlisle, yet it's still affecting my life. Pennsylvania doesn't have any tribes, not a state, not a community, not a federal. We're like this woven of intertribalism surviving, with lots of descendants living here from that school or that place. But the question, growing up, how did domestic violence impact my family and community off the reservation here in the mountains of Pennsylvania? I guess I'll be a little rugged or controversial, but speaking not my truth, but the truth. Like, I learned that recently, that my truth versus the truth, it's a big misnomer. And the worst, I'm a rape survivor, sexual assault survivor, child abuse survivor, domestic violence. I'm a hybrid love story, like for real, for real. The worst abuser I've ever had in my life that I'm still healing from. And this work healed me because I've been doing it for 22 years. My brother has severe self-harm, mental health, and substance abuse issues. He's been in and out of jail. My brother and I survived together in tandem from the woman that abused us both. So this movement healed me, but my brother didn't have that opportunity to survive his childhood and enter a healthy manhood. He's still on that journey. So that's can be mind-blowing for some, thinking about women that are abusers. That is just the truth. Women are abusers. Sometimes they can be physical, awfully physical, but then also severely psychologically abusive. And that is the truth that I just want to state today. But my answer to the question with all of that is like the backup basket on my shoulder, but my voice is going to say that families, things are changing in the best way. Because when I was young, when my brother and I were younger, going through what we were going through, of course our families knew it, but there was no PSAs. There wasn't shelters everywhere. There wasn't big trials on TV. There weren't commercials and flyers and Facebook saying, "You're a survivor, we're here for you." It was a very lonely place. And in the recent conversations with my aunties and uncles and cousins was that if you didn't, there wasn't the language to call fire that someone would come and help you. It was like, that's not our business. That's in the family, you leave it alone. And that isolated us. And it took a lot of healing conversations to forgive our family, our extended families, because they didn't want to get involved because that was the way back then, right? So how did it impact back in the day as a survivor and a victim, being just a little kid that thought this was normal, but I knew enough to run away because it hurt so bad, right? But it just was normalized, but I knew it, we both ran away. So we knew it was wrong because it hurt. So that impact is still coming to fruition because now the conversations are coming out that family abuse and intimate partner violence is wrong. So I think our communities are still growing and still learning today in 2022 from what we went through when we were younger and what our parents went through when they were younger and our extended families. So I think the impact resonated and stuck in our hearts and minds, but now we get to kind of let it go and expand and learn and do better so that the 7 generations that keep going get better and better and better and better. And that's, I guess, my testimony to answer this question. Won't be loud. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I don't want to spend too much time on this question because I kind of jumped in there, but you ladies did a wonderful job. And next slide, guys. I just want to say that it is a lot sometimes when we answer this, you want to answer just like one question, you think it's going to be simple, but it's not. It's so deep. This stuff is so deep and it's so enrooted in who we are, who our communities are, who our ancestors are. Along with Rebecca about Ohio. So between Ohio and South Dakota, the reservation life, the urban life. And one thing that's not talked about is I'm Indigenous Lakota woman on my mother's side. what it talked about is on my dad's side, that grandmother was full-blooded. We don't know. Full-blooded, we don't know. She was in a boarding school somewhere. She got out of boarding school, and then she didn't talk about being Native American until she was an elderly woman. And we're still trying to find out more about that. And again, that goes back to those assimilation camps, these children being abused to the point that they weren't allowed to talk about their own culture, that they were told that when you get out of school, marry a non-native person so your children are light complected, so they blend in, so they won't be taken from you. I mean, that just hits me so hard. Today is my son's 18th birthday, and I can't imagine someone taking him from me at any point in his life. And those of you who have children in your lives, or, we all once were children, what that looks like to be removed from your home. It's a scary thought. And so that has impacted us in our communities for a very long time. Our next question for our panelists, and I just wanted to go ahead and get that up there so they can have a minute to look through this. What kind of challenges do Indigenous children and youth face today that was different from the generations growing up in the past, that you've noticed, that you see in your own lives, or kind of how technology and these different things are playing its part in our communities? And I know Hope, Raquel, Rebecca, you guys are all mothers as well as Indigenous advocates and leaders in our communities. So I figured you'd have some good perspective on how children and youth are facing different challenges with today's technology and different things. So I'll mix things up. We'll have Rebecca start this question and then move backwards.
Thank you. I appreciate that opportunity. So holy crap, the internet. Oh my gosh. What? I don't know how my life would have been. Maybe it would have been better. I don't know, because there's cyberbullying and all of these threats, but there was more access to information, right? Because the internet works so fast. But yeah, the internet, I think, is a huge educational opportunity and outreach mechanism so people aren't isolated in their experiences. But the threats are just so prevalent all the time on the internet. So I think that's a big one. And I don't know the statistics, so I don't want to talk out the side of my neck about it, but my intuition and my experience at 22 years in the movement, that trafficking has exploded, when maybe it was either still there in the same way back in the day, or it just grown and grown as what do they call it, $1 billion industry. There's organizations that are operating with people that trickles down to, there's a dude on the street that's recruiting, yeah, but he has a boss who has a boss who has a boss who's a big corporate manager running to make money. And that wasn't a part of my sphere or my experience when I was a kid. So I guess that's my short answer to pass on to the next. Except, well, sorry, I call them my popcorn thoughts that happen, but man, we have OVW, we have DOJ, we have Violence Against Women Act. So our movement has grown as we learn more about the real truths, right? We have a tribal division at OVW, which is awesome. I don't know that that existed when I was a teenager. I don't think it did. So our movement is growing to help and reach more kids than when I was a kid. Wobula, that's all I got. I'll pass it on.
Awesome. That's a great answer. I feel like it is both a challenge from the past, right? But we also have all these new opportunities, because I know when I was a kid, my mother struggling, leaving a domestic violence home, there were no shelters, there was no support. That was 1986. So I mean, just where we've come today with shelters and advocacy, I mean, that's something to be grateful for. That's why I'm always thanking all of you in our Indigenous communities for the work that you've done, the foundation that you've laid, people like Vicki, laying the foundation for us in these organizations to really pass on their knowledge so that we can support that next generation coming up. I also want to, as Hope and Raquel answer the question, when you're thinking about the challenges of that today's youth face, not only those internet issues, but also like, and the last 2 weeks, forgive me if everyone knows these are going to be hard topics, right? But these school shootings, I mean, if that doesn't just want to make you go back to COVID and keep your kids home, like I'm there. I'm like, I'd rather my kids were at home and I could just watch them all day. I don't want them to have to leave my house because it's scary. The world is scary and gun violence is real. And I just continue to pray every day for our children and our youth. And so if you guys want to elaborate on some of the other challenges that children and youth face, I'll call on Raquel this time, which you were in the middle last time. So next time you'll be first.
Well, yeah, and I'll just be the middle person. But I think so many valid things, I think trafficking, to go to kind of wonder, was it to this biggest extent as we see it now, or are we just focusing on it and bringing more resources to it? I don't know, but I think trafficking is a big one, especially when we think about, there's so many challenges. I am a mom of a 6-year-old, and I feel like I decided to have a child in a time where things felt, there's always been political unrest, the threat of climate change, all of these things looming. But, I feel like I decided to bring a child into the world with, the world being completely different than what it is today. And I think that's a very privileged thing to say, because I do think that the colonization has really, and just imperialism has impacted this planet by, in so many ways. But I think about, the gun violence. I also think about, I think COVID right now, the impact of being, I have friends who have very young kids who literally the first 2 years of their lives, they were isolated. A lot of their moms have had to quit their jobs to stay home and with their children. So the lack of childcare, the lack of affordable childcare. So, I think COVID right now and the impacts of that, the immense amount of stress that a lot of families are under right now through inflation and being surrounded in a household where there's a lot of stress going on and really being kind of isolated in that way. So I think COVID, and then absolutely gun violence, every day. I'm going to share a story. My husband's best friend shared with my husband an experience that their 6-year-old had to do in a school, and it breaks my heart. And I'm probably will start crying, maybe not, but they had to do one of those drills, an active shooter drill, and his 6-year-old daughter literally panicked because she had light up shoes, and they turned off the lights and her shoes wouldn't stop lighting up, and she panicked. And to me, that a 6-year-old, my kid is 6, and never understood, to have that be a reality is hard. And I think there's that impact of, children having to, they're facing not only into, family violence within their home possibly, but in a social world where violence is all around us. There's the threat of violence at their school, which, for a long time, we say school is probably one of the safest places for students who live in households where violence is happening. Well, there's that threat of violence, right? Like that, we see that every day. So I think there's that impact. And even just climate change, having to experience the world being incredibly, fires, where in Colorado Springs, when I was a teacher, our when we had that big Waldo fire, and I had a lot of students who lost their homes. So with climate change, I think there's that. And then of course, social media. And I think to go with Rebecca, social media brings good things, but it also brings, a lot of hard things that I don't think, it was kind of technology too fast that we didn't really know how to adapt. And I think about just peer, interactions, self-esteem. There's a study that I think came out, and I think I just briefly read it, and it was maybe a year ago. I'm not 100% sure, but just, I think, the girls and how their self-esteem is completely just low, and how social media has kind of influenced that. And then to go with just violence, I think there's just so much right now. You wake up every single day as a parent, you wake up every single day and there's something. And so I think there's that, but I also love that, Amber and Rebecca, that you also bring good things. That yes, we have OVW, we have DOJ, but I also see a lot of movements led by moms and led by women and just parents that are talking about reframing parenthood and going back to that more of a gentle parenting, kind of changing the, when I was a kid, it was very much like, you be quiet, you're a child, no one hears you, you have no, autonomy, kind of that I think we're going back to, and I don't think that, our parents really thought we weren't sacred, but it was just a normal way to parent. It was a normal way to just say, okay, kids, just go somewhere, don't be seen, and now I think there's a movement, and I even think like Indigenous motherhood, and I think a Latinx a parenting, just some of the people that I follow that are really starting to bring up how we raise our children. And so I hope that with all of these challenges that we see, I also see the resiliency and see the strength of parents these days who are really not only reparenting themselves from a lot of harm. With Rebecca, I have grown up and experienced a lot of similar things. When we think about physical abuse and how, I've experienced that, but then how we're reparenting ourselves, but also choosing to parent our kids differently. And so I think there's a lot that's hard to unpack with this world, but I also think we are all moving towards a world where we really want it to be less just violence free, and really emphasizing that our children are, and I loved the name, our children are blessing, that they are our blessing, they are sacred, that they are not something that we parents or adults own or control. They are little human beings with their own personalities. And so I really want to leave with that note. So I'll pass it over.
Thanks, Raquel. Something that stood out, I'm kind of just going to piggyback a little bit here, is you said changing our parenting and during the time of COVID, and that was rough for everybody. I myself am a single parent of 3 children, 2 who have disabilities. And I've been through a lot of trauma, domestic violence, sexual assault, and strangulation. And during that time with very little support, I really noticed how my healing had to continue, how I had to stay focused on my healing. And was I being the best parent that I could be in that time? Because my traumas were falling back on me. So I think as all of us in our positions, with even being advocates, that we really need to step back sometime, make sure we're doing self-care. But on that note, I was going to kind of bring it to something like more positive. And one of the things that I notice that Indigenous youth often are forced to face is a lot of the parents leave their traditional communities and move to urban areas to pursue employment or education opportunities. And so when they're there, they're already subjected to discrimination. They're denied equal employment and education opportunities. While all be going through that, they're also in an urban area lacking adequate cultural appropriate education, which kind of stinks because during COVID, I actually was like, I know traditional healing does well, and I know I need to go back to my traditional spirituality. And so this is where I found the internet was good. I actually joined our community college on campus and took Omaha tribal history, Omaha language, and I was able to embrace my culture from a distance, also teach my children. They now know we, Nomba, Table, Duba, Sato. They know the first five, numbers of our culture and tradition. So I think when there's, try to look for the positive, and there's always going to be negative and positives to each side. And we just have to keep trying to stay on our healing journey as parents and advocates.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, both Hope and Raquel. You both had wonderful answers for that question. If we can bring the next slide up, I just want to say that the next slide, I think, reflects more of what you are both or all three kind of talking about, which is how your work reflects your healing journey in your community and with your children. And I really want to give you the opportunity to kind of talk about the positive side of the work that we do. And so we'll start with Raquel this time, and then I want to get through at least maybe one more question for you guys after this question. We have about 15 minutes left, so just keeping that in mind. So Raquel, go ahead. How does the work you're doing today reflect your healing journey as an Indigenous leader in your community? And do you view yourself as a Indigenous community leader, or when did you start feeling like, this work is more than just work? I feel like Vicky is the one who brought it to my attention. Like, you are the expert and I'm like, me? I'm an expert? Like, and then it's like, okay, well, yeah, because we're the ones doing the work. We're the ones out there doing the trainings. We're the ones contacting the people. We're the ones living the life. I mean, no matter, I feel like today, in today's society, right, where we have these boundaries of, like we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, being Indigenous enough, right? And it doesn't matter whether you're darker or lighter, or you know your language, or you don't know your language, or you can dance, or you've been to Sundance, or you grew up in an urban setting or on the reservation. Your journey is unique to you. Every one of us as Indigenous people, our journey to getting here today is unique to each one of us, and so our healing journey is unique to us. So if you can share about your unique healing journey with us, that'd be great. And we'll start with Raquel.
This is a big one. I think, to go back to the leaders in our community, I don't know if I've ever really considered myself that. I think I'm just a person. So when we talk about my healing journey, I think the biggest thing that helped me was space being provided for me to heal, to talk about, some of my experiences and to heal. I think healing is like a lifelong thing. I think that, there are months where I feel like, man, I feel really healed from a lot of things. And then, the next couple of months, it might not feel that way, or things come up. I think that's with trauma, right? Trauma, we never know what will kind of bubble up and why we experience why we feel what we feel, or experience what we experience or interpret. I think the biggest thing, how does my work that I'm doing today reflect my healing journey, is really wanting to provide space for people to just be vulnerable and really talk about just what they're going through, their experiences, I think when I was a kid and really went through a lot of hard things, when I look back, I think I didn't have people to really talk to about it. For me, it was more of like, I was pushed more to feel like, okay, everything's perfect, everything's normal, nothing bad is happening, I'm completely perfect. I was the kid who wanted to get straight A's and wanted to do all the activities to make it seem like my life was completely normal, that I wasn't experiencing a lot of things that I was experiencing. And so I went through a lot alone. I really interpreted a lot. I had to internalize a lot of what I went through alone. And so I think doing this work now, I really emphasize, and this is something I teach my 6-year-old, that things get bigger if we keep it to ourselves. And there's a wonderful kids book that I love, and it's Ruby Finds a Worry. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that one, but it's about this little girl who, experiences anxiety and depression for the first time and is worried. And then she keeps it to herself. And the more she keeps it to herself, the bigger it gets. And then once she finds another kid who kind of has the same thing and they share with each other, those bubbles get smaller. And so I think really my work that I do today is I really just want to provide a space, when I talk, Hope had mentioned about, really taking a step back and looking at your healing, is I think when I think about my mom, or even just parents, when I was a kid, it was really also parenting alone, that you don't really talk about your struggles as a parent, or you don't really have a lot of spaces. And so I think it's becoming more open for the space to just be vulnerable and to really heal. I don't know if that really answers the question, but I think that's one thing that comes to my mind.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody's healing journey is unique and different for them. And I feel like you said, a lot of times growing up in our history, it wasn't talked about parenting alone, just doing I know you mentioned it was actually in the last question, kids are seen and not heard. And we have moved, I wouldn't say, again, we're moving backwards and forwards all at the same time, because we're healing those past 7 generations that have had so much trauma, and how we connect with them and how we push our resiliency forward with the strength that they left us and the teachings that they left us that are hidden in our language and our traditional ways, and the beat of the drum when we're at sweat and powwow and all those wonderful things that come forward. So thank you. I think that answered the question. Hope or Rebecca, if either of you have anything to add to this question.
I was gonna say the same thing as Raquel, is to be that resource for someone. We have a saying in Hasia, we want to provide a sister space. And what a sister space is, or now we say relative space. But we want to be able to provide that victim of a survivor a space to be treated like they're a relative, that we're not putting any judgment. This is an open space. We treat them as our relative, just like we would treat, I would treat my auntie. That's how we would treat that survivor walking through the doors. Hasia also has implemented like a healing garden. There's so much other spaces to provide healing, even when you're off reservation. And so that's one of the things. And I think that healing is nonstop, and an advocate's always learning too from the survivor, vice versa. So
Absolutely, healing is ongoing. I love that saying. Lenny Hayes said that to me about 4 or 5 years ago, and it has stuck with me all these years, and he'll be presenting tomorrow. But I think it was one of the deepest things that ever impacted me, was healing is ongoing, because before that, I thought there was going to be this day and time where I would be healed from past trauma, not recognizing that healing happens every day when you get up and you choose not to use drugs and alcohol, and you choose your sobriety, and you choose to live your truth, and not just in sobriety, but in living as a good leader and being a good parent, and choosing to not be in a domestic violence or sexual assault relationship. Choosing your peace and your self-care every day is part of your healing and ongoing journey. So I thank you for bringing that forward, Hope. That's a very good point. Rebecca, did you have anything to add?
I did, and I'm gonna come off a bit of a weirdo, but I'm a hybrid love story, so that's just a part of it. I don't know. So a part of my journey on this healing journey. So I don't know if anyone's ever seen the movie Party Monster or read the book Disco Bloodbath. So that was a part of my world. I was not directly involved in the club scene in New York City. I was in the club scene in New York City. I wasn't involved with the inner circle of the murder. But I was a club kid. I ran away. I'm a mountain girl. I came home to the mountains of Pennsylvania, but when I ran away, I went to DC and I was homeless. I went to Baltimore. I went to New York City, and I lived that club scene, 1990s rave scene life. And there was a murder and it was awful. So that's like the testimony of Disco Bloodbath. I don't know why I opened with that. But at the end of the day, I was not healed. I was partying a lot as a young runaway youth. I had a lot of trauma, and that just muted all of my feelings. And then I moved back to Pennsylvania. I was done with New York after the murder in the club scene. And then I just wanted a day job. I didn't want to bartend anymore. I didn't want to be serving alcohol. You all know what I mean by that. I didn't want to be serving. And I just looked in the newspaper because that was the thing at the time. And I found a customer service position, and it happened to be at the YWCA. And I had a 2.5-hour interview in the Violence Intervention and Prevention Department of a YWCA that had an SADD and homeless shelter. That interview was 2.5 hours. And I was like, oh, I'm in this space now. Well, I understand this world. And that interview turned into almost like a spew or a testimony. And it was so organic and natural. And I walked out of that interview with a middle management position to man the 24-hour DBSA hotline. And that ish changed my life, and it put me on the road. And I've been on this healing journey ever since. And I did share earlier, my brother didn't have this opportunity. So I constantly share these moments, this testimony, these educational moments to try to help my brother see the light and go on his Indigenous journey. So like 22 years later, it's a beautiful thing. So I did mainstreaming in an urban setting for 10 years as doing that YWCA work. And then I got hired at NIWRC and the Women of Color Network, and now MILSAC, and now Hybrid Love Stories. That the core of our Indigenous values keeps on circling. It started here, it went around, went so far away from the bottom, right, the point, and comes back to Indigenous values. And it always keeps cycling and circling in this healing journey. And when we share these storytelling moments of our individual pathways, we are creating leaders with youth that are like, wait a minute, that's like me. When we make ourselves vulnerable and share our stories, that's when other people can say, wait a minute, that fits, I feel that, and gives them their freedom of their voice. So that's what this movement has done for me. And I think if we keep ending the silence and the stigma and the shaming that happens, we can keep growing the 7th generation to do more than we did, just like our aunties and our grandmother did before us. So, Wopila, thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. We only have 2 minutes left. So with that, I want to click to the last slide, which is slide 7. And then you each have 30 seconds to quick answer this question, but I think it'll be a good note to end the session on. And then if we do get kicked out of this session, we're taking a 15-minute break, and then we will come back with our 2 sessions that you can all choose from. So if you could give our Indigenous youth a message about strength and resiliency, one message, one word, or one sentence, what would that be, guys? And I'll start with Hope.
I knew it. I would say learn your history and really seek your culture. That's all I got.
Awesome. Thank you. Raquel?
I just want to go back with what Hope said, because I think that's really important, is to learn your history and, proud of who you are. And also, I think just one quote that comes to my mind that I just recently read is, maybe instead of us relying on children and youth to be resilient, maybe we create a more world that no one has to be resilient, that a world with less trauma. And that's what I think that, yeah, that how do we create a world where we don't need to be so resilient? So.
Awesome. Yes, absolutely. Rebecca?
Keep on keeping on. That's what I have to say to the kids. Keep on keeping on. And that goes with Violet. Our ancestors prayed for all of you, not just parts of you. So keep on keeping on with all of you, babes. That's it.
Absolutely. Thank you all. And I guess my final words would be healing is ongoing. It's part of that keep on keeping on. We just continue to heal every day, and there are going to be ongoing things that come up, but with the prayers of our ancestors, we are still here and we are still resilient, and we still continue to do the work for them and for the next 7 generations.